Happy Monday. I'm Mayor Vega. I'm the state rep here in Holyoke, also a proud Holyoke parent from Ian White, so great to be here. We've got some information we want to get to people tonight and have some time for some questions and answers. We're about 28 days away from the election. As you know, we have an election in November that not only has this important ballot question on there, but also the election of our city council and our school committee. So please get to know your candidates and get out and vote. There is no mayor election this year, so a little bit different, but I think that this question will probably be bringing lots of interested people to the table. Tonight, the idea is really to just present information and then again have some questions and answers. We have about a 30-minute presentation, including a video, including sort of the history of how we got to where we are. We have our architect with us to kind of explain some of the schematics and why we're building two and what's happening as far as that. We have people from the school department obviously here and administration, and our superintendent Stephen Zrike and his team here. So we're really here to give information and hear from you. We're really hoping that you'll grab one of the fact sheets as well to sort of make sure that you're up to speed of where we're at. We're hopefully going to try to avoid the sort of going backwards type of questions, like why aren't we doing X, Y, and Z? A lot of that's answered in the facts, and a lot of that's answered online, but of course we can address that. So hopefully we're in a situation where we're talking forward. We want to make sure people are informed as they approach this vote. And there's a lot of information to gather and a lot of information to intake, and I think this is a real amazing opportunity for our city to address our education system, but obviously there is some issues that we want to deal with. So without further ado, who am I introducing? Who's going to pick things up?
Right here.
All right, our friend, Superintendent Stephen Zrike. Thank you for being here. Thank you. And thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you all for being here this evening, and I think it's great that people are looking to get informed. Whatever decision you make, we appreciate people coming to hear the facts about the building proposal. My name is Steve Zrike. I'm the superintendent of schools. If anybody needs translation, we have a translator here. Si alguien necesita not translation, interpretation. Interpretación, lo tenemos ahí. Nick, can you wave your hand? Okay. So the other thing I just want to point out before I start, if you have any questions about about what it's like to be here every day, I do want to point out we do have some teachers here from Veritas School. I'm putting them on the spot. And Andrew Murdy's was greeting at the door. He's a teacher at Peck School. So those are folks you can certainly ask what the experience is like being here every day at Peck School. But I wanted to just give you a little background on, let's see here, okay, on how we got to where we are with this proposal. The last time we had a new building in Holyoke was 1989, which is 30 years ago. It's a long time. I don't know many places in the Commonwealth that have not had a new facility during that period of time. When I arrived here as superintendent of schools in 2015, one of the things I heard right away is that there was a building project that was in the school building authority pipeline. The district had been trying to build the city had been trying to build a new building, and it had bounced back and forth between a downtown school site and then McMahon School. And of course, when I first arrived, the facilities wasn't my first priority, but it quickly became a priority when I saw the condition of the buildings. Not so much the high schools, because the high school buildings have been more recently renovated. But the elementary and the middle school spaces, I quickly saw buildings with windows that were shut, that were nailed shut, fogged out, and facilities that had really poor heating and cooling systems. So we made it a priority to start talking about how are we going to replace some of the existing buildings. And through conversations with the School Building Authority, which has the responsibility of providing funding to districts to build new facilities, they offered, at no cost to Holyoke, to do an audit of all of our facilities, including Lynch School. And so we gratefully took that offer, and they did in the summer, in the summer of 2016, as well as the fall. They looked at every single building in Holyoke, and they determined, using objective criteria, they brought in an outside consultant who determined sort of what the pecking order is and the conditions of the building. And Lynch was quickly ruled out as a building that could be returned to our portfolio because it was so outdated. It had been, it's a smaller plant, and it also had been neglected for such a long time. And what came out of the report was that Peck, Metcalf, McMahon, and why am I drawing a blank on that last school was, no, in Lawrence, sorry, Lawrence School, came out as the lowest of scoring of the schools. The report's available online, but what stuck out to me more than anything else was the report told us that we had no appropriate middle school space anywhere in the district. None of the buildings were built as middle schools or junior highs, whatever you want to call them, except for this school, Peck. But Peck was so poorly designed that because of the way it's shaped and the condition of the building, they deemed that none of the spaces were appropriate for 21st century learning in middle school. So that's when we began to discuss thinking about how we revitalize the middle school experience in Holyoke. While at the same time, I had families and teachers telling me that one of the biggest mistakes Holyoke ever made was going from having elementary, middle, and high school separate to going to the K-8 model. At first, I dismissed it out of hand because I thought there were other pressing issues. But having had the chance to be in the community over that period of time, I began to understand why people felt that way. And so, as a school district, we worked very closely with the school building committee, which the mayor appoints, and we met to discuss putting a plan together to the school building authority around examining the middle school spaces that we had in Holyoke. And we put, they agreed to examine our facilities and determined, the building committee from Holyoke made a recommendation to the city council and the school building authority to look specifically at the middle school spaces in the city. We examined a whole set of different options. We looked at having one middle school of 1,100 students. We looked at having multiple middle schools. We looked at renovation. We looked at different sites in the city. And ultimately, the building committee in March of 2018 recommended to the city council and the school building authority 2 mid-sized middle school buildings that we felt like were in the sweet spot of what it took to run an effective and efficient school today and for the next 50 years. We thought one school of 1,100 students, which is the number of middle schoolers we had, was going to be overwhelming. It was going to compromise safety. It was not going to allow us to provide the individualization and personalization that you want in an urban school district. Anything below 550 students is the problem we have right now. We're running middle schools with very few kids in our K-8s, so we can't offer the level of programming and the experience that you would want. Music programs, sports programs, arts programs, and specialized experiences that target just middle school students with anything below 550. So we made a recommendation. We did not think necessarily that the school building authority was going to support that proposal. But when they read the proposal, their feedback to us was, this makes sense, given the history in Holyoke, and given the community demand to return back to elementary, middle, and high schools, given that you have no middle school space. And then they were also compelled to support it based on the notion that we were looking at for every child. This wasn't just for some kids, this was for every child in the city of Holyoke. The equity conversation, we weren't building this school for just some, we were building it for all students. In August of 2019, the school building authority approved the final grant for this project, which is almost 76 million, which is among the highest in the state for a core building project. And a core building project is a full-scale construction project. It's not a renovation. It's what the state calls a core building project. And then, of course, November 5th, 2019 is the proposed middle school vote. So I want to take a moment to just, instead of answering the question, we're gonna show you a brief clip about why Holyoke needs 2 middle school buildings. But before we load that, hold on a second, Aaron. Just one thing. There's 3 things I want to point out in this video. Our current state as a district, as I said before, we have the lowest, our lowest rated school facilities have a number of safety and health concerns. I want you to pay attention to that in this video. Significant concerns about air quality and safety in the buildings that I just described as being the lowest rated buildings. The second thing that I want to point to in this video is, again, we have no appropriate middle school space, and we're going to show you that through the lens of Peck School, both indoor or outdoor. Most middle school spaces also have fields for kids to play, turf fields for kids to play. They have appropriate basketball equipment. Middle school kids don't necessarily have a playground, but they do have outdoor space where they can compete athletically as well. And then finally, the last thing I'd say, our current state is we're operating many buildings that are old and very, very expensive to operate. Heating, cooling, and then repair on buildings that are as outdated and as dilapidated as some of our buildings prove to be very costly. And then, of course, the cleaning them also proves to be costly for us. So I want to take a moment and show this video.
The Peck School was built in 1973 to hold 1,000 students. It consists of 2 multi-story octagonal towers and a single-story gymnasium built into a hillside. The plan is unusual because of its irregularly shaped classrooms and large windowless spaces in the center of each floor plan. From a school safety standpoint, the building has several major problems. First, the main entry is located where it cannot be seen directly by staffed offices. Visitors are buzzed in and can freely visit the building without having to sign in with staff. Once in the school, the corridors circle around each tower with regular classrooms distributed on the exterior. These corridors have poor sight lines that make supervision and wayfinding difficult. The third major life safety concern is that Peck is a 3-story school building with no sprinkler system and a large number of inoperable windows. Any major renovation of the building will trigger a requirement to install sprinklers throughout. The school also has major environmental problems that make it a challenging and unhealthy place to teach. The greatest challenge is that the heating system is a proprietary electric-based system that was installed in 1973 by a company that no longer exists. Classrooms overheat in winter and summer. Poor air quality and thermal control leave students and teachers struggling with lethargy and experiencing higher than normal rates of respiratory illnesses. Another environmental concern is that these obsolete heaters emit a loud background noise. Related to the thermal comfort issues, the classrooms on the outside of the floor plan have small windows and offer very poor daylighting. A large percentage of the windows are made of a scratchable plastic such that views from many classrooms are not possible. Classrooms on the interior are worse than on the exterior because they lack windows or natural light altogether. This room is an example of an interior space where the old science labs were once located and have become obsolete. Many of the larger classrooms, like this one, have been repurposed to meet special education needs that they were not originally planned for. As the design team for the feasibility study, we spent 5 months exploring the possibility of renovating Peck. One of the greatest challenges we saw was the building's underlying structural system. Peck is constructed with the same basic structural system as a Walmart. The walls are unreinforced concrete block walls, supporting steel joists, with concrete floor slabs. It is built to 1973 standards and is incapable of supporting any increased structural loads. Any major renovation will trigger a requirement to meet the current seismic building code. Hazmat issues are also a concern in a building built in 1973. During the feasibility study, we tested materials to quantify hazmat remediation costs. We discovered that the exterior walls of Peck are filled with vermiculite. The building also contains asbestos, mercury, and lead paint, and is presumed to contain PCBs. PCBs are volatile compounds that don't stay where they are installed. If during a renovation, window caulk is tested and found to include PCBs, the masonry around the window also has to be tested and potentially removed. The hazmat remediation exposure alone is greater than $2 million. In addition to sprinklers and insulation needs, we also have to account for current ventilation requirements, accessibility requirements, and elevator upgrades. In reviewing the renovation option, the building committee found that the renovation was a far less cost-effective proposal than demolishing the current school and building new. The proposed new schools, in contrast, will exceed current energy standards by 20% in order to reduce operating costs and ensure the building is uniformly comfortable and efficient for decades to come. The schools will be organized to meet today's teaching and learning styles, but are planned for flexibility in room types and furnishings. They will have better daylighting and acoustic treatment, and materials and systems will be selected to ensure that lower operating costs and student health and safety are always top priorities. The Peck School was built in 1973 to hold 1,000 students. It consists of 2 multi-story octagonal towers and a single-story gymnasium built into a hillside. The plan is unusual because of its irregularly shaped classrooms and large windowless spaces in the center of each floor plan. From a school safety standpoint, the building has several major problems. First, the main entry is located where it cannot be seen directly by staffed offices. Visitors are buzzed in and can freely visit the building without having to sign in with staff. Once in the school, the corridors circle around each tower with regular classrooms distributed on the exterior. These corridors have poor sight lines that make supervision and wayfinding difficult. The third major life safety concern is that Peck is a 3-story school building with no sprinkler system and a large number of inoperable windows. Any major renovation of the building will trigger a requirement to install sprinklers throughout. The school also has major environmental problems that make it a challenging and unhealthy place to teach. The greatest challenge is that the heating system is a proprietary electric-based system that was installed in 1973 by a company that no longer exists. Classrooms overheat in winter and summer. Poor air quality and thermal control leave students and teachers struggling with lethargy and experiencing higher than normal rates of respiratory illnesses. Another environmental concern is that these obsolete heaters emit a loud background noise. Related to the thermal comfort issues, the classrooms on the outside of the floor plan have small windows and offer very poor daylighting. A large percentage of the windows are made of a scratchable plastic such that views from many classrooms are not possible. Classrooms on the interior are worse than on the exterior because they lack windows or natural light altogether. This room is an example of an interior space where the old science labs were once located and have become obsolete. Many of the larger classrooms, like this one, have been repurposed to meet special education needs that they were not originally planned for. As the design team for the feasibility study, we spent 5 months exploring the possibility of renovating Peck. One of the greatest challenges we saw was the building's underlying structural system. Peck is constructed with the same basic structural system as a Walmart. The walls are unreinforced concrete block walls, supporting steel joists with concrete floor slabs. It is built to 1973 standards. It is incapable of supporting any increased structural loads. Any major renovation will trigger a requirement to meet the current seismic building code. Hazmat issues are also a concern in a building built in 1973. During the feasibility study, we tested materials to quantify hazmat remediation costs. We discovered that the exterior walls of Peck are filled with vermiculite. The building also contains asbestos, mercury, and lead paint, and is presumed to contain PCBs. PCBs are volatile compounds that don't stay where they are installed. If during a renovation, window caulk is tested and found to include PCBs, the masonry around the window also has to be tested and potentially removed. The hazmat remediation exposure alone is greater than $2 million. In addition to sprinklers and insulation needs, we also have to account for current ventilation requirements, accessibility requirements, and elevator upgrades. In reviewing the renovation option, the building committee found that the renovation was a far less cost-effective proposal than demolishing the current school and building new. The proposed new schools, in contrast, will exceed current energy standards by 20% in order to reduce operating costs and ensure the building is uniformly comfortable and efficient for decades to come. The schools will be organized to meet today's teaching and learning styles, but are planned for flexibility in room types and furnishings. They will have better daylighting and acoustic treatment, and materials and systems will be selected to ensure that lower operating costs and student health and safety are always top priorities.
Again, this is a good, this gives you a good depiction of the challenges we face in this current building. Lawrence School also has challenges that are similar. At Lawrence School, the biggest challenge is the classroom spaces are tiny and could never, they don't even accommodate our class sizes for today. Even with 20 students, they're tight. The building was built so long ago. Metcalf School is another school that scored particularly low. Metcalf, if anybody has walked up and down the stairs at Metcalf, they're all warped. Makes it very hard for children with disabilities to go up and down stairs, or any child really, but particularly in a district we're trying to make our school spaces accessible to everyone. I just want to talk about the future state. That gives you a sense of what the current state is, and again, I encourage you to tour the building if you want to see for yourself. But the future state, I'm going to share just briefly about it. Go take a look at schools in other communities around us that have been built. East Hampton is building a new elementary school now. Granby just opened a new school. South Hadley just opened a new elementary school not long ago. Our building, in many ways, has a lot of those features and is more cost efficient than those facilities are. But what we would allow us to do is have science labs. We do not have STEM spaces or science labs in any of our middle schools, except here, and you just saw a picture of what it looks like here. It would allow us to have dedicated art spaces, which we don't have in our buildings, and they're not middle school art spaces. We'd be able to have instructional areas that would be appropriate for technology today, which is much more mobile than it was 40 years ago. It would allow us to have music classrooms, art classrooms, drama spaces, and then what's needed in education today is to have nimble, flexible spaces that can be multi-purpose, which allows students, we're trying to mirror the workplace where there needs to be a lot of collaboration, students working, talking with one another, not chopped up in, not spaces that, not your typical classroom spaces that allow for traditional education, but multiple spaces that allow kids to come together. We do a lot more small group instruction than we did 50 years ago with our ESL instruction, with our special education supports for students, with therapeutic needs that students have. And then our teachers. Our teachers need spaces where they can plan and meet together. In almost all of our buildings, we no longer have those spaces because we either have had to use them for other purposes, or the fact is they never existed with the construction of the building. And then finally, we'd love to be able to use the outdoors more for teaching space, for either students to be outside, to run around and get, to athletically, but also to have gardens and outdoor classroom spaces, which are much more significant part of the curriculum today. The other thing that this would allow us to do in the future state is that it would allow us to right-size the school district. Right now, every school has either 2 or 3 classrooms per grade. That limits us tremendously in what we can do in terms of programming for students. We are now having to, in our K-8 buildings, we've got our staff spread across 9 grade levels. We have pre-kindergarten in many of our buildings. And so we're asking our staff to, if you're an art teacher in a K-8 building, you need to serve all 9 grades. That's really hard for someone to do well. Really hard to do well. We have coaches, instructional coaches, that have to work across 9 grades, right? It becomes very hard for us to provide the level of support that we want for both kids and staff in that sort of arrangement. We want to be able to open a pre-K center, which our plan calls for, which would be eventually to turn McMahon School into a pre-K center. We have doubled the number of pre-K seats in the Holyoke Public Schools over the last 5 years. We need to continue to expand those offerings if we want to make sure our students are ready to learn when they come to school. And so my goal is to have 400 to 500 pre-K seats, and we need the space to do that as a system. We want to restore art, music, PE spaces in all the schools. Right now, people are teaching on carts, they're teaching on stages, because we're jammed at the elementary school level, and because we forced our middle schools into those spaces. We would love to expand dual language in the city. We've got huge demand for that, and we need more space to do that. And then finally, right now, to create more middle school space, we opened a middle school at the Dean campus, right? We opened STEM, which was I think, an innovative plan, but ultimately, we want to continue to expand our career technical education. As Dean has become more popular, the campus has become more popular, we would like to return it to a strictly a career technical program where, again, 10 years ago, Dean had 600 to 800 students. 2 years ago, Dean was down to 150 students. But Dean is starting to grow again, and we'd like to return it back to a full CVT space. And then finally, in this future state, in the future plan, we would save $4.5 million by operating fewer buildings. We operate 11 school buildings right now. We really only need 8 facilities. Now, we would bring back one as a pre-K center, which would represent more students. But with that reinvestment, we would be able to do more of the things that I think our kids deserve. We need more arts programming and enrichment opportunities after school. Every school should have art and music. They don't. The reality is right now they don't in our schools. We do need more intervention support for students who are struggling in math and literacy in particular. We have some interventionists in some schools, but not universally for the number of needs we have. We want to offer stronger professional learning for our staff who are incredibly dedicated and committed, but they need to be in a school system that's developing them as educators. While we have small class sizes, I'd like to make them smaller, given the needs of our kids. We still have class sizes in the mid-20s in some of the elementary grades. Especially in first grade and kindergarten, those class sizes should be below 20 if we're really going to move the needle for our kids. And then many of you know about the mental health challenges, not just in Holyoke, but across the state and across the country. And we certainly have many students who suffer from mental illness. And in our schools, we have some support, but not enough. And then finally, I would say that we often hear from our teachers that we need more paraprofessionals in our buildings to support them in classrooms. And then finally, we'd love to see world language spread throughout the system. We offer Spanish at the high school level. If you're in a dual language program, you get 2 languages, but that's it. Most school districts offer, at least at the middle school level, some form of dual language, or a second language. And it's not just Spanish, they offer other languages as well. Our pledge as a school district is that we have offered to contribute $1 million from that $4.5 million saving back to the city. I know there's been a lot of discussion about whether we can do that. The Commissioner of Education is working with us to provide clear guidance that can happen. And we felt all along as a school system, we were asking the citizens of Holyoke to support this plan, that as a school district, we would do something that no other district has done, which is reinvest some of the savings back to the city, because we know we know that the sacrifice that folks are making on behalf of the schools. I'm going to turn it over to the lead architect on this project, Dorrie Brooks.
I got a question.
We're going to do questions at the end, or do you want to do questions now?
We were planning to do them at the end.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, hi, my name is Dorrie Brooks. I'm going to go very quickly. I would love to spend 2 hours just talking about the designs, but I know people really are more concerned about the big picture issues. So we're going to move through this fairly quickly, but I did want to share my email address and phone number. My job as the lead architect on this project is to represent the design team, which consists of engineers and architects, hazmat consultants, geotechnical consultants, a very large team of people. So I'm here to answer on behalf of them for the information they're provided, and that they will provide through the design process and construction process. And I'll continue to be on this project, if it continues, for several years, so you'll see a lot of me. My job is to really just reflect the design to you and communicate about it. So if people have questions about the design that they don't get answered tonight, and they can't find the answer, we've put over 2,000 pages of documents up, so I know that that's a lot, and some people are digging in a little deep, but that can cause people to get into sort of a spiral on information. So please don't hesitate to ask me a question about the design or about MSBA process. I'm happy to answer it. I'm happy to come anywhere to any group and answer questions personally, okay? I want to just address a few of the things that have come up. So how are the costs determined on these projects? These are really big numbers. Holyoke hasn't had a new school in 30 years, so seeing numbers like this is eye-popping. Combining 2 schools at once makes it even worse for everybody, and we get that. So I just want to answer just basically the feasibility process. So we were hired in January of 2018. We spent about 6 months looking at various sites, 7 different sites, 5 different scenarios at a narrower body of 3 sites that we narrowed down to. We looked at all these in various ways. The 2 primary sites that we did full feasibility studies were for Lawrence and Peck, because they were the existing school properties the school system controlled that they could put into this process. So that process involved a team of engineers and architects studying each building. It involved materially testing the buildings to see how much hazmat there was and what that would quantify in cost, and that number was known. And then to determine code analysis, and this is very important, and it does impact the numbers. And I want to point out that this building, built in 1973, was built before there was a building code in Massachusetts. So obviously it's out of code compliance. And the way the code changes constantly, as things are invested into the building, that will increase the cost. So the cost estimate has to adjust for how much you're doing and what tripping points that triggers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we also work with the district on ed planning and program analysis. What do they need? So the determination there is that a middle school for 550 students is going to be roughly 110, between 95 and 110,000 square feet, given this district's population and consistency and the state guidelines. This building is 170,000 square feet. So it's bigger than what was needed. So that's an important point to know. And then the cost comparison. So we give all the information that we've gathered ultimately in the feasibility stage to a cost estimator who looks at all the projects going on in the state, who knows what costs are on construction for new and renovation. I want to correct something Dr. Zrike said. A core program for MSBA is a renovation. When we're brought in to do a feasibility study, we're asked to look at a renovation, renovation addition, or new project. So a full renovation is a core program. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's something that people keep, saying, oh, if it's renovation, it can be somewhere else. And then, so we did look at renovation costs around the state as well as new construction costs. Once we get past feasibility and the committee had decided what their preferred program goals were, which was the 2 middle school goals, we then looked a little bit more closely at those to see, we were looking at new at Chestnut versus a renovation at Lawrence, and we were looking at reno of Peck or new at Peck. Those were the narrowed goals. And in schematic design, once they've selected the preference, we then detail that and cost estimate that, but those detailed estimates are much more specific to an actual design. So the number you're looking at now is a schematic design cost estimate. So as I was saying, when we narrowed down to four possibilities, the interesting thing about that is that because of the amount of square footage in Peck, which is 170,000 square feet, if you renovate all of that, you're renovating 65,000 square feet that you actually aren't looking to use. That makes it more expensive. But this building, for all the reasons that were shown in the video, is also very expensive because once you renovate more than 30% of the assessed value of the building, you trip code requirements to upgrade accessibility, elevator, mechanical systems for ventilation, et cetera, et cetera. And the biggest was structure. This building is complicated structurally, and it would require custom bracing to upgrade it seismically. And that's on top of the other issues. So Peck was really different. What I wanted to make clear here is that the more cost-effective for both sites between new and renovation was new, because you're building more efficiently to what you actually need. You're not trying to work around what exists. But more specifically, I want to clarify that we love renovations. We are not opposed to renovation. As a firm, we did a project in 2016, which was Drury High School in North Adams, that received preservation awards. The difference between some renovations and others is, does it fit your program needs? Can you adjust to that? So as Dr. Zrike said, Lawrence is actually a very nice building. It's undersized for the needs, but not just as a building, but also individual classrooms. Whereas at Colgrove, we had large enough room that we could make the configuration of the spaces that the district needs. MSBA wants the project to meet educational goals. It doesn't matter if the taxpayers want the cheapest project or because you have to work with the educational goals of the district. So if you start it over, you still have to figure out what are the goals of the district and be sure the project meets that, or MSBA will not contribute to the project. That's a critical part of any core program. So we have done historic preservation projects in the past. Lawrence is a prime project for renovation, but it doesn't serve this district's needs for a middle school. I still think, and I want people to know that I think it's a beautiful building with great bones, a far better quality building overall than Peck ever was. Better design, better thinking, better material quality. So it does, I think, as an architect, have lots of reuse potential, but that ultimately is going to be a separate, project. It could be reused as housing or other purposes. We took it off the table, the advisory building committee did, because the site next door is an empty lot. And even once you've remediated the soils, because it's an older city site, it's still cheaper than it was to add inefficiently to Lawrence. So both projects ultimately go towards the new construction on a per square foot cost. I won't repeat what Dr. Zrike has said and what the video said. I just want to, at some point, encourage you to kind of participate again when we can talk more specifically about the design. But I do want to just stress the difference between taking a building like this and trying to get it up to current standards and making modifications slowly versus starting new. Like from an energy standpoint, building the building around current code requirements versus trying to modify this existing building. You know, doing that at every level of what you require to do, again, all those codes exist. We know how to work to them. They're at a higher level of expectation than they were in the 70s. And we would be building directly to that rather than, wasting a lot of money and energy trying to modify a system. So ultimately we would get not just a system that meets the educational goals, but is a better functioning building. And in that way, saving in operating costs over long term. I also want to point out that the MSBA requires that when you look at a core project, and they're going to invest a significant amount of money, it has to be with the expectation that it will last 30 years. If it doesn't last 30 years and you decide we've invested all this money in this project, now we actually want to do it again 15 years from now, then they will actually try and recapture their investment in the project. So their test is about longevity as well. So that's part of how they look at it and why they're very critical about these projects. So with both of these projects, I also want to point out something I think is underspoken about, which is that even if you don't have a child in the school, these buildings will improve the communities around them as well. So at Peck, I'm trying to show here that the actual new footprint of the school is smaller than the existing footprint of the school, which means we're opening up real estate around the building that will improve the connection to Crozier Field, that will improve the connection to the high school, that will regrade the site so that there is a connection between these things. And as a part of the project, we'll be improving lighting, circulation, landscaping, recreational amenities that the community will have access to, as well as sidewalks, which I know is something really important in both of these neighborhoods, to have safer, better lit, and better operating sidewalks. We can't do the whole neighborhood, but we can at least do quite a bit around the school, and I think those have real value to the community as a whole. What happens if we do not build the 2 new middle schools now? This is where I'm kind of gathering information from other people as well and helping for everybody. So this process is a very prescribed process of the MSBA's. You have to start with a feasibility study, do that, go on. That feasibility study has to include an educational plan, et cetera. If this project doesn't pass, and you want to do a core project again, you have to go back and start over with that process. Only they will again recoup the expenditure they put into the feasibility study, which is roughly about $800,000. Margaret? A little bit higher, 800 to 900, the MSBA contributed.
Right.
Plus you have to pay your share of it as well. So that would make the next project more expensive in that regard. Plus, any new project down the road will have to have the escalation cost of construction costs going up. So when the advisory building committee was looking at this idea of doing 1 versus 2, do we do 1 now, do 1 later? Which a lot of people logically would say, that makes sense. The problem is it actually in the end is more expensive because you're postponing the construction of the second school, and the cost of construction is going up for educational projects 4% a year. So you're adding that each year to the project. So that made the project ultimately more expensive to do 2 schools in succession. That's true, and that's true. And then in the meantime, if the project doesn't go through, the two big factors for the district are they have to keep working towards this middle school model, but without the facilities to support it. And they have to keep operating buildings that they already find are super inefficient. So this building is the largest consumer of electricity in the municipal portfolio. It will continue to be the largest consumer of electricity in the city's municipal portfolio. There was one slide missing there. Did I skip one? I have to speak to this. Yeah, renovation versus repair. I just want to hit this one more time because there is a confusion here that if you say no to this project, you can go back to the MSBA and just say, hey, why don't we just do a window job, and just a window job, or just do the window in the doorway, or just do the mechanical system. That was something they were willing to consider for Kelly and other projects because they were just single systems on single buildings. The MSBA runs 3 programs. One is the core program, which has to do all the stuff we talked about and does end up with a lower reimbursement rate as a result, versus the repair programs, where you do get a higher reimbursement rate, but you're only repairing particular systems, like a Windows system. So Holyoke High School was not done under the MSBA. It was actually brought in through the previous program, and it was a wish list program. It operated under different rules entirely. So it's not possible to go back and do Peck or Lawrence as a repair program because the extent of needs here are too great. These buildings do not merit just singular system corrections. They have to go through this entire process, unfortunately. So they're full renovation projects or full new construction projects. Okay, I'm done. Mayor Morse.
Thank you, Dorrie. I just want to also add, I think that it was also two quick things as the mayor comes up. It's important to know, actually, when Superintendent Zrike was talking about the cost savings, it's also key to think about one of the great things we've done over the last couple of years is partnerships. And we have a lot of partners coming into our schools to offer arts or offer additional education or music classes. When you have to have those programs go to 9 different schools, it obviously costs more too. And the second thing I think to pick up on what we've talked about on the renovation projects is that these other buildings that will be offline, there's opportunity, economic opportunity that's also available to us, and hopefully we'll be able to capitalize on, as was mentioned about Lawrence School. And we all know that economic development in education is key, not only to me, but to our mayor, Alex Morse. So Alex, I'll take this.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you first and foremost for spending your Monday night learning a little bit more about this project. I know some of you have been to other meetings already, and if not, welcome, and I really appreciate you taking the time to get more educated on why we're here today, why we're talking about the importance of these school building projects. And I won't repeat much of what has already been said. I just wanted to some extent contextualize both the importance of these schools, not just to educating our city's young people, but the larger vision for the city as well as we invest in education and the ripple effects it has on workforce development, on public safety, and also its impact on really being transformational in not just this neighborhood where Peck is, but also when you think about the Chestnut Street site, an entire city block across the street from a relatively new public library, in just a couple of weeks after we kicked off a pretty sizable housing project there with Wayfinders that will reactivate a few vacant sites there. And you think about adding this investment of a new middle school in a neighborhood that historically has had many challenges, it's exactly the area where you should be making these type of investments in the community. But again, thank you so much again for being here tonight. And I will just start off by saying, you have a big choice before you on November 5th on the ballot, and there's a lot of information being sent your way in different avenues, be it social media, conversations at the grocery store. And so again, coming here, we're just interested in talking about the facts behind the projects. And people obviously have the right to make that decision, but we want to make sure when you make that decision that you have all the information that you could possibly have to make the most educated decision you can possibly make at the ballot box. And strong schools obviously equal strong communities, and I know there are folks opposed to this project, and even driving here seeing signs that say there's a better way, and I'm still trying to figure out what a better way means. I haven't seen an alternative plan other than we should make renovations or we should just focus on other schools. And I think when you look at the economics and what has already been said tonight, if we wanted to renovate Peck, if we wanted to renovate Lawrence on its own, it would literally cost the city of Holyoke taxpayers more money than building 2 brand new middle schools in the city. And if we want to open up space to expand universal pre-K, continue to do that in the city, get back to a K through 5 middle school system in the community, this really is the most fiscally responsible way to provide the best possible educational spaces for our young people. We didn't know exactly what the end result would be when we embarked on this process. We didn't know if it would be renovation. We didn't know if it would be building schools elsewhere, 1 school, 2 schools, more than that. But after multiple years of due diligence and research, looking at the numbers, this is the result that ended up being the best option for the city. And so it's not as if there was some preconceived notion of this is the result we want to get to, but how can we accomplish our end goal of providing the best possible built environment to then lend itself to the best possible educational programming, both for our students, but also the staff, our teachers, and also the biggest transformational impact on the community as well. I'm going to also just touch on a little bit of the city's financial snapshot. There's also been some arguments made that the city just frankly can't afford this, that the schools are in receivership and the city is on the verge of bankruptcy, which couldn't be further from the truth. And so you're going to hear a lot over the next several weeks, the next 4 weeks from tomorrow, about how the city can't afford this and that if this goes forward, it puts the city in a precarious financial position. And that's just not true. If anything, this actually puts us in a better financial position, both internally at City Hall with the city budget, for the public schools, because again, when this happens, we'll open up between $4 to $5 million of operating expenses within the public schools to invest back into the classroom, to achieve smaller class sizes, to be able to make those investments in classes, to again, increase educational outcomes, and saving so much funds that again, the school department has committed to sending $1 million back of those savings to the city to be able to go towards the debt service payment to make sure that the average tax increase, whenever it does take effect, is as low as possible in the city. So just the city's financial outlook, we were happy just a couple of weeks ago to get a long-term bond rating increase. And so there are rating agencies, S&P, Standard & Poor's, that occasionally evaluate the city's financial flexibility, our budgetary performance, and then they give us a bond rating that oftentimes dictates our eligibility for certain credit scores and interest rates when we do projects like this. And so they look at our budgetary performance over a several-year period, economic development projects in the pipeline, potential budgetary issues, and it's a pretty comprehensive interview pretty much with city staff and department heads, the financial department heads, planning and development staff. And so we were able to have a very strong performance in that meeting, which led to a bond rating increase and also reaffirming our short-term underlying rating as well. And so strong budgetary flexibility, an available fund balance in fiscal 18 of 13.5 of operating expenditures. And I would also note that the city's stabilization fund is the highest it's ever been in the city, approaching $13 million. Again, out of about $125 million annual budget. So when you compare the size of Holyoke's stabilization fund by percentage of the overall annual general operating budget, it's among one of the highest percentages in the entire state of Massachusetts, and that's something we're very proud of. And so this myth, again, that we keep tapping into stabilization to pay for operating expenses just isn't true. It's gone up by millions of dollars just over the last several years. I would also say when you think about, and we'll get to the more specifics of what the average tax increase would be, I want you to leave tonight knowing that the numbers we talk about are the most conservative, worst case scenario numbers that are possible when it comes to this project. And so we're locking in interest rates today, and so that bond rating meeting that lent itself to a better bond rating for the city lent itself to some of the most competitive interest rates that we've seen since we started this discussion with the project. And so if we had this meeting even just a couple of months ago, I would be here tonight telling you that the potential for an average tax increase on a $190,000 home would be close to $250. Tonight, after the contribution from the schools of $1 million and because of the bond rating increase and better interest rates, that increase has gone down to an average of about $129 on a $190,000 average house. And so you think about the value of your house, if it's $190,000, you can probably, we'll get to a calculator where you can actually calculate what that means. But $129 for the entire year on a $190,000 average house. That's worst case scenario. That assumes we have no new economic growth over the next 3 years. But I would also say many taxpayers and voters think that you vote yes on November 5th and then November 6th or even January 1st, you all of a sudden get a tax increase. The tax increase, if one exists at all, wouldn't take effect for at least 2 to 3 years from now, which allows the city to continue promoting economic development projects, continue our work of improving property values, and put the city in even better shape than it is today. And it's not as if the tax increase would get higher. Again, this is worst case scenario numbers. And so when I talk about projected growth, we're really happy to see this year property values are already going up for both businesses and homeowners, 4 to 5 annual property growth. And then there's a lot of revenue growth that we still haven't captured. And so when you think about the number of cannabis cultivation facilities that are in the pipeline to open up over the next 2 to 3 years, when you think about projects like the $12 million investment Amazon's making at the old Atlas Copco and the hundreds of jobs going there, When you think about the redevelopment of Lynch School, the redevelopment of the Geriatric Authority, as well as the new condominium project that was just proposed next to the Geriatric Authority, that's a lot of economic development projects in the pipeline just over the next 24 to 36 months, if not sooner. And so none of that new tax revenue is captured in these projections. And so when you think about the process over the next 24 months to 36 months of when we actually have to issue the debt, we're going to be in a much better place than even we are tonight to get that $129 average annual payment as close to zero as possible. And I want you to know this isn't a project where city officials are interested in just getting the Taj Mahal of schools, as some have called it. Our core tenant, our core value is providing the best possible space and education to our kids. And we're just as committed to making sure that the financial impact on taxpayers is as small as possible. And I think I speak for all of the city councilors. I know I speak for myself and everyone at City Hall that we're not interested in spending a dollar we don't have to spend to make this possible. And I've been really proud of the fact that when you look at our reimbursement rate, you look at the average cost per square foot on these projects compared to the average cost per square foot on similar school building projects in other parts of the state, we're at the bottom of the list in terms of the cost of this project. And so they're building schools in Boston, just one school alone, for upwards of $300 million. We're getting 2 new middle schools in Holyoke for close to $130 million, with $80 million being paid for by the state. If we want to do renovation, we want to do something else, we say goodbye to the $80 million investment from the state. And so the state funding again, some folks have argued that we should be eligible for the 80% reimbursement from MSBA. We are an 80% community, and how the 80% works, it's based on the eligible parts of that. And so there's a max cost per square foot that we're eligible for, and we're getting that, which is in state legislation. Some folks have said, well, we got 80% for the $20-something million renovation of the high school. That's not true. The effective reimbursement rate on that project was around 62%. And so what's happening with this project is no different than any other MSBA project that the city has embarked on in modern times over the last 15 to 20 years. And so we are getting a 57% effective rate. Still puts us among the highest effective reimbursement rates of similar communities, particularly gateway cities around the state. I would also just point out, and I know Rep. Vega often does, when you look at our school budget now, the state funds about 87% of our annual schools budget. And I also did want to just point out that I know Rep. Vega has been a big champion of the Promise Act, and the Senate unanimously passed an education reform bill last week that would fundamentally change how we fund public schools in Massachusetts, and it would have a particular impact on places like Holyoke. Over 7 years, we could be looking at an additional $20 million a year to go into programming and education in the public schools. And so the focus isn't just on the built environment in the school. We have seen data and studies that show that investing in new infrastructure, new buildings, better classes, air quality, making sure we have science labs and art and music and theater obviously lends itself to better performance. But we also recognize it's about professional development and the philosophy and the culture we build in those schools. And the education reform bill, as we look at the potential of millions of dollars and more state funds in the next several years, will only help advance and enhance the education that we're providing in these new facilities. And so I would just encourage folks to learn a little bit more about the reform bill that was just passed last week. The $1 million commitment, Dr. Zrike touched on it. We're working with the Commissioner of Education now on the specifics of it. And so basically what that mean would be that the city and the school department would negotiate a memorandum of understanding that would specifically document the $1 million that would come to the schools on an annual basis to offset the cost of the debt service. So I know you probably can't see this from where you're sitting. So basically, we could opt when the city bonds for a project, right? So you could 20-year. We did a 20-year, we would have a 2.5% interest rate, 25-year, 2.75, a 30-year is 3%. And so the average annual cost on a 30-year bond for the city would be about $2.9 million. And so that $2.9 million would then be spread about through all of the taxpayers, both business and residential taxpayers in the city. But because we're getting $1 million contribution from the school department, that brings that number down. And so the estimated residential impact is 68 cents for every $1,000 valuation you have in your property. And so if anyone's good at math, you're welcome to do the math for yourself if you own property. So for every $1,000 that your property is valued at, you'd pay an additional 68 cents on that. And so you could do the math, and I think on the Yes to Invest website, there is a calculator that you can go to and just do the math for yourself so you have a sense of what you're looking at. And so again, this is just the average single-family home value in the city is $190,000. Again, it goes to the 20-year option, 25-year option, and 30-year option. And again, $129.60, the worst-case scenario for a tax impact. And I would also just point out, this was a big fight in East Hampton recently. And when they were campaigning for it, the average tax increase was mentioned to be around $700 to $800 a family for the average home in East Hampton. Now that they've approved that project and have made some improvements and gotten better interest rates, the average increase for homeowners in East Hampton is as low as $250 just in a couple-year process. And so we've been working with East Hampton. What are the steps you took after the vote to be able to bring that number down so much? And again, we're just starting this conversation at $129. I said this at the beginning. I know this is the most cost-effective option available to the city. I would say doing nothing is really not an option. But I would add that if you really want every single kid in the Holyoke Public Schools and the kids that will come to have the best possible education, doing something isn't an option. If we do nothing, we do what we can with the spaces and resources we have. And I would mention the number of families that I've met over the last several months and several years. For years, we've seen declining enrollment in the public schools. So families choicing out, whether that means charter schools, parochial schools, school choicing out to other school districts. And with the implementation of a dual language program, for the first time in years, we have a waiting list to get into public school programming in the city of Holyoke. And with every student that comes back to the public schools, they bring with them thousands of dollars that come with those students. And so for the first time, we're bringing students back and increasing enrollment. We've been able to reimagine the high school experience with money from the Barr Foundation, creating the two-campus model. We've been able to expand universal pre-K and create different pathways for students in the district, again, to make families come back to the Holyoke Public Schools. And if we really are serious about making sure that for families that the Holyoke Public Schools are the #1 district of choice for everyone, to not build these schools would be really damaging to those families that have started sending their kids to the elementary schools, for preschool through elementary school, because now parents have to wonder, where am I going to send my kids to middle school? And so the last thing we want to see is for families to not even choose elementary school, or maybe just choose elementary, and then opt to go somewhere else for middle school, and then likely somewhere else for high school. We want to be able to capture the families and parents that are now looking at the public schools for the first time in decades. And while we have momentum, and we've seen improvement, the fact that when I took office, only 49% of our kids were graduating from high school, and today 72% are. There's momentum happening in the district, and to be able to now build these schools would be incredibly exciting for the possibility of where we can continue to go. And I mentioned briefly before, this isn't just an education project. For me, this is a workforce development project. It's a neighborhood revitalization project in many ways. Even when you think about the building we're in today, we do nothing. I mean, this building is beyond repair. And so the last thing we want is for the city to have to spend $2 to $2.5 million to demolish this building to make way for something else. And as part of the MSBA project, we're at least partially reimbursed for the demolition of this property. So again, I just want to thank you all for coming. I know many of you probably have questions about things I said or some of the other speakers. I'm going to pass it back over to Aaron, and then I know everyone who spoke and some others that are here tonight are eager and willing to answer any concerns or questions you have. And as was said before, if there's questions that you forgot to ask, you go home and you want more information, don't hesitate to contact me. You can get contact information from other speakers here tonight. There's also a frequently asked questions page or sheet over there. So there's ample information to answer any questions that you may have. And again, if we don't have the information for you tonight, I know all of us are committed to being as transparent and open about the information as possible. So thank you again for being here, and thank you for listening.
So we are in school, so the panelists, if they can come up here quietly, come up to the table as people gather their questions. I would just add two quick things. So we have Mike Bloomberg, Mayor's Chief of Staff, Dorrie Brooks, Margaret Wood, the other project manager, the mayor, Irene Feliciano Sims, our school committee representative, Dr. Zrike, Yuritsa, the school operating director, and our Peck principal. So come on up. I want to just point out to make sure that it's clear, because again, sometimes misinformation is out there. This is not a 2.5 override. This is not in perpetuity. 20, 25, or 30 years does sound like a long time, don't get me wrong. Hopefully we'll all be here in 30 years, but the reality is that when this project is paid off, that goes away. So this is a debt exclusion vote. It is not a 2.5 override. It's not just mincing words, they are two different things. If we get an override, it's in perpetuity, it stays in there. This increase in your tax goes away when the bond is paid, just to be clear. So, and then we have a first question here, then I'll come here.
Okay, I got several questions. Just regarding the Peck principal, how many students are here now?
Well, so we have a co-location with our friends at Veritas. At Peck, we have around 290 students
So you're gonna have a double increase in students here? For 550, that's what they're saying?
for the new middle school, yes, sir.
Okay, so that will affect the neighborhood?
Well, no, I mean, we have two buildings here right now. One is 290, and Veritas has what right now?
231.
So we're actually at almost 500 right now here.
Is this gonna be a prevailing wage job, unions involved?
Yes.
Okay, what's the effect on Crozier Field?
In general, the new footprint, it doesn't touch Crozier Field, there's no construction on it. The new building actually pulls back so that there's a better connection, because that was one of the critiques of the existing plan, is that gym is basically a wall. And it's, even though the school has contact with the school, they actually don't send kids out to use Crozier Field very much. They used to, but they've cut that back. So it should improve the relationship between the two without actually touching it. And we've tried to also address some of the concerns we've heard about parking and sidewalk access to Crozier, because that's been a complaint in the neighborhood.
And regarding the same thing, regarding like the architect side, why not add to Lawrence? I mean, just like the library added, and looks beautiful.
Yes, and it
That
is,
would be,
yeah.
I think, the best solution for Lawrence. I understand this
Yeah.
place, I mean, this is just impossible. Should be imploded any time. I get it.
Right.
Lawrence, I don't think so.
right, no, we looked at Lawrence adding to it. You have to take the existing plan and work with it and then add on. When we started out looking at it, we also knew that, we assumed we could use the land behind Lawrence for an addition. And assuming that, moving forward, we were not able to make it as efficient. So we would have had to, we took the cost of how many square feet we're renovating, and then the cost of the new, and the combined number is still higher than new, because it can't be as efficient a building as if we built new. But then along the way, we then found out that the city found out that they actually can't develop in that parcel behind the building because it's Article 97 property. So that kind of also cuts off Lawrence as an option, as an
Now,
add-on
last one.
option.
How much skin are we in right now with the project without any buildings?
So what has been spent so far for the schematic design process is a total of 1.190 thousand.
And will that be reimbursed?
And
by the state
80% of that is being reimbursed by the MSBA.
If the project goes forward, move forward.
Well, right now, the way the MSBA thinks about this is they treat this as a sort of standalone process to get to this point. So they are currently reimbursing the city 80% on the 1.190. So if it goes forward, that all gets folded into the total, but that's the status of what's been spent to date. And so I did the math, so the 80% is like about, the MSBA share is about $950,000.
And you will oversee the whole project yourself?
And I will be overseeing the entire project, yes.
Yeah, and
Blame me.
I would just add quickly to Lawrence, because you make a good point. The city's plans wouldn't be to demolish Lawrence. We do think it has historic nature there. It would be great to have it converted into office spaces, condominiums. We want it to be a tax-paying entity. So, if other school buildings, or whether it's Metcalf or Lawrence, the plan isn't to make them obsolete, but to how do we repurpose them to make them a benefit to the community.
You see a lot of old structures have been demolished, it makes no sense.
Yeah, no, I
Well,
agree.
and also,
We've got 3 more questions.
Oh,
right in the
okay.
pipeline. So I want to be mindful of people's time with it, and we can definitely talk a little bit after too, but I want to make sure we get the questions here. Go ahead.
This question's about the impact on homeowners or property owners who are going to possibly incur this increase. Knowing the city's population, what percentage of the population are the actual taxpayers? property owners.
If I could on that. So every renter, so I live in Holyoke and I rent here. I pay tax as part of my rent. The building I'm in still pays taxes. And so in terms of what the question is and how many taxpayers there are in the city, yeah, there are landlords who pay taxes on behalf of 8 units or 16 units or 30 units, but that cost is passed on to the rent.
So the property owners not only get an increase in their tax bill, you're saying that the people that rent, their landlords are in turn going to raise their rent.
If that's how they wanted to pay for the tax bill, yeah. So what we're saying is that it's an average of 68 cents per $1,000 on your property. And so what the landlord chooses to do with that is completely up to them. Again, on a $200,000 property, that's about $140 a year. And so if you have a duplex worth $200,000 and it's $140 a year, that's an extra $70 a year per unit. That's an extra, oh come on, $8 a month, something like that.
But that's not taking into account that 37% of the renters in this city are on some type of state aid. So that number is being recouped by the state, and the landlord is going to recoup that money through the state necessarily.
Possibly through the state or the federal government.
And the other problem with some of these landlord owners are way behind in taxes. I've looked at the latest list of delinquent taxpayers for large places, and there's quite a list. What do you plan on doing to collect that money?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that for a while. I mean, over the last 8 years, for the first time, we've actually gone to land court and we've seized we've seized about between $4 to $5 million over the last 8 years in back taxes. We've done the first public auction since 1976 after we've seized properties, going through a request for proposal process. And so, for the first time, we're actually taking it, serious. The city for many years didn't want to be liable for other people's property, and so we never actually took people's property for tax title. But at least under my administration, we've seized dozens of properties. We've put them out to auction. We've put them out to RFP. Just cut a ribbon on a house today, Habitat for Humanity, a property we took. And so, we take this serious. We don't expect homeowners to have to pay their taxes if out-of-town landlords aren't paying their taxes. We're in housing court every day. We're putting houses in receivership or under receivership or appointing a receiver for those landlords that aren't, abiding by building and public health codes. And so we have a team that is now doing that. And then even on the financial side, you have to enter a payment plan. And so if you don't enter a tax repayment plan, that's when we begin land court proceedings pretty expeditiously. But if there are particular properties that are top of mind for you, we're happy to look in. We can give you the status of the.
But does the city sell tax liens or tax certificates for people to buy?
We've looked into it. When you look, we've already done a lot of the low-hanging fruit with the highest values back to the city, and so firms that have looked at purchasing them in bulk, which would then bring money back to the city. The assorted inventory isn't as financially attractive to the firms as it probably was 8 years ago, because we've gotten a lot of the low-hanging fruit the first few years of that process.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can chat after.
I just have a question. How much certainty do we have that we're going to get $1 million? Is that every year from the school department? Is that $1 million every year, or just a one-time payment of $1 million? Number two, the question I have is, we've been saying that this is going to save thousands of dollars every year because now we're going to have these, state-of-the-art buildings, but that's fine. But we're going to have to hire more teachers. We're going to have to hire, people to maintain the building anyways, higher wages perhaps. So how do we get that number, that $1 million number that we're saying that we're going to get back from the city? From the school department?
Go ahead. One thing to keep in mind right now too, the school department already pays the city for services rendered out.
Yeah.
And so some of this is looking at some of those services increasing up. This isn't unprecedented per se. It's a little bit different that we want to focus this additional funds to a debt. But the school department already does give the city money for services that the city provides. So it's looking at those services. But
Yeah, so it would be annual to answer your first question. It would save $4.5 million to $5 million just because we'd be operating fewer buildings. It would be fewer staff. for the same number of students, because we'd be able to consolidate our programming into 2 buildings for middle school. So we might have fewer custodial needs, fewer administrative needs. So there would be savings, and there's also the energy piece of it as well. In terms of the $1 million, because of the savings, we feel like it can happen. Just so people know, the City Council on an annual basis approves our budget, but they can also reduce our budget if they want. They've done it to me before. They did it a few years ago on the cost of the lease for the central office, because they wanted us to bring it down. So ultimately, there's some stopgap to that. But we do know the commissioner and his team is working with us to confirm that it can be done on an annual basis through the services that we purchase from the city. I have no reason to believe that it can't happen. And again, for the protection of the citizens out there, your elected officials can also say, school district, we're going to reduce your budget by $1 million because you promised that you were going to contribute $1 million on an annual basis.
So, Mayor Morse, if for some reason you were not our mayor, would what we're planning now for sure stay in place?
In terms of like the educational space, or?
Yeah, everything, the funding, the mission, all of it.
Yeah.
What could change if there was a different mayor?
Yeah, I think a lot of the infrastructure work and the underlying work of the schools in particular, this process with the MSBA, we're locking ourselves into this commitment. And so, the election this November will chart a course. And so we'll sign a series of agreements with the MSBA because they've made an investment in this project. You can probably speak a little bit more about sort of the legal ramifications of that. So obviously in the educational space, that's important. I know it's important to Dr. Zrike and the work we're doing here in the school system. And there's buy-in from the community. And so I think when you think about the changes happening in any city, I don't think they depend on one person in particular, but they really depend on the people that live in the community and what they expect from their elected leaders, the level of civic engagement and accountability that happens. And so I would hope to believe that, the work that we've done over the last 8 years in the educational space in particular has really involved and excited and inspired people to get part of this work. And I see this project as really transformative. It's going to I don't think I'm going to be here for 30 years, but I'm really, and I don't think you'll let me be here for 30 years. But I'm really excited about the fact that all of us in this room can make a decision that will be impacting kids that, number one, aren't ours, but kids that will be in the city for 15, 20, 30, 50 years from now. And we'll be able to say that we were part of this. And so this is much bigger than me and my term as mayor. It's much bigger than any of us in this room. It's, people made decisions before our time to build our schools, to build our hospitals, to implement national government programs that have a safety net for all of us, and I think it's time for us to be able to do the same for the people that come after us.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, as a senior citizen, I'm going to be retiring next
Yeah.
year. I'm fairly new to Holyoke as a homeowner, but I have heard murmurs of how senior citizens can volunteer to have a reduction in their residential tax.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was other means available to seniors to have their residential tax.
Yeah. So there's 2 programs. I'll talk about one, and I'll let Aaron talk about the state program. The first one we have is the senior tax abatement program, and so I think is it 55 or 60? I think if you're
It's 60.
Is it 60? Thank you. See, I don't know this. So if you're 60 and older, so our assessor's office and our council on aging handles that. So if you volunteer up to 92 hours, is it 62? Something makes me.
The gentleman in the back.
You must be part of the program. So basically,
There are 2 programs.
the veterans one too.
Yeah, the veterans.
Yeah.
Regular senior, you're 60 years old. If you do volunteer 62 hours, you get $750 off your tax.
Yeah.
If you're a veteran and you do
You get $1,000.
125 hours, you get $1,500.
Yeah.
Right now, the senior center, there are 30 positions available within the city. You have to do your service, your hours, within the city.
Departments, yeah.
To the city. So it's a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
Most of the people that apply for it, every 2 to 3 years, if you keep applying, you can.
But it's only 30 a year.
Huh?
It's only 30 applications a year.
30 applications a year for the senior, 20 for the veterans. Right now, I don't know if that's changing or
Yeah.
somewhere else. At the senior center, I'm part of that and the veterans.
Yeah, so we budget for that every year. The city and the mayor and the city council have the right to increase the budget there. And typically seniors get it every other, you would think more people apply than actually do. And we've been trying to get the word out. And we just joined the veterans program a few years ago. And so that's not just for veterans themselves, it's for spouses of veterans as well, to get the $1,000 to $1,500 off. And then there's the general tax abatement process as well, regardless of volunteering. If you can demonstrate a financial hardship, you meet with the Board of Assessors and make your case. And then there's a state program as well.
State program, I don't want to do that. The state circuit breaker, absolutely can send some information in. It's a pretty straightforward process to go through. I have 2 more questions in the queue, but I don't know if Irene's going to get any questions, so I just want to say, do you want to say something from the school committee about your sort, and then we have another school committee, Dennis Burks is here as well, about your sort of commitment to the school committee? I mean, again, they will change over time as well. The commitment as a school body, as a school committee, as a body, feels on this committee.
Sure. Us as a schools committee, you know, we're really backing up these two new middle schools. I think from our standpoint is really listening to the constituents that was put us in our seats. Different takes, right? A lot of questions, and I think for us, it's just making sure that you guys have all the information that you guys have available to you, making sure connecting you with different kind of members here to kind of talk about the questions that you guys might have, the answers, and just getting the information out.
I think everybody here is in favor of it. It really just comes down to a financial thing. You know, look going forward. You know, I'm looking at retirement in the future. My salary hasn't changed in a couple of years. We're looking at giving back $1 million, and we're talking about a $4.5 million savings. Why $1 million? Why not 2, 2.5, 3 out of that $4.5 million? If there's a $4.5 million in savings out there, maybe we don't need this override vote. Or
You can't do it legally. Can't do it beyond $1 million legally, because that's most of those dollars are Chapter 70 dollars that have to go to public education. You can spend a certain amount of that towards services from the city, but beyond that, that money has to be earmarked for education. There's a net minimum that has to be spent on schools, and so when we looked at, I would love to give more back, but legally we can't do more than that because of the net school minimum expectations that the state sets for spending on public schools has to be spent on direct programming and services in the schools. And facilities does not count for that. It's a good question, Bill.
That knocked out a lot of my questions. Also get the reimbursement rate. A couple of things was, you just noticed that you're projecting another 4% growth on homeowners. Now, everyone can say that it's wonderful that your house is valued at 4% more. My house was valued at 4% more again last year. It went up $272 in taxes. If you're going to project another 4% coming up next year, there's another $275 in taxes. Actually, it's a little more, but so you're looking at about $550 to $600 right there, not including the CPA on top of that already. And then you're talking about special assessment that has dubious numbers, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. Yeah. We can't project what's going to happen in 3 years with those interest rates. Simple increase of 0.5% or 1/4% will dramatically make that change. So I think the problem is the math that we're trying to talk about today doesn't always equate to down the road. I mean, that one little thing is not average house. I know we always talk about the average house. I don't understand why we're not putting out the statement in there. Well, you find that tonight, the point state, the $0.1 and all that kind of stuff. So the average home, in my particular case, if it goes up $1, it's going to be $375,000 or $375 a year on top of the CPA, on top of last year's 4%, and on top of next year's 4%. So I get beat up because I have no reservations about building new schools, but I have a reservation that is the math.
Yep.
And talking about Granby, it was pointed out earlier, they did a $74,000, 74,000 square foot, 37,000 square foot renovation on Meadow Street, on the middle school, in conjunction with a 37,000 square foot an add-on, like similar to the library, at a tune of, was it 36 million? So you're talking about 75,000 square foot renovation, and which is supposed to be the higher end of it, in conjunction with new construction. I'm just trying to find out why our construction costs are so much more dramatic than other areas. I think it's like right now, it's like $660 a square foot.
First two questions you answered.
I mean, I could be off, but
Yeah.
mathematically, it comes to about $660 a square foot.
I'll answer the first two, and I'll let Dorrie, as the architect, answer the last question. So, the first question was about regarding a 4 to 5% property value growth, and whether that's going to be an additional 4 to 5% in your taxes. So the mayor mentioned a little bit in his presentation, said worst case scenario, and he actually used the term if at all, and then if at all going forward, whether that's needed. So if your property value goes up by 4 to 5%, we don't necessarily recuperate and add on to your tax bill more than that. The tax is a rate. So if your property value goes up by 4 or 5%, and that is enough to encompass the additional expenditures that are related to the school, then you're not going to see an increase on both sides. Does that make?
No, I'm not talking, I don't understand the difference in the two costs. What I'm saying is that if my cost particularly is $300 a year,
Yeah.
I'm all for that, for the new school. I would love that, but on the other turn, we don't seem to be talking about the larger assessments on our property taxes. Mine will go up in 2 years of neighborhood growth over $600, not including the special assessment, I'm gonna call it, for lack of a better term, for 30 more years.
Yeah, but so if your value goes up, the rate doesn't need to increase with it.
What rate?
Your tax rate.
The tax rate. That's, see, the hope is that, so the
Right, so
city
my
council,
tax-
I know, but the city council has the ability to lower that rate.
So I'm just trying to figure out what this here. So the assessed value of my house went up 15,000 this year.
Yes.
Times that's at $19.14, that's $275. If it goes up
So if we have
15,000
new-
next
so-
year, times that times $19.14, isn't that going up another
If
$275?
it stays at 1914.
Yes.
And so that's the point here. And so the tax rate changes every year. And so we didn't talk about a necessary tax rate. We talked about the additional amount of money that would cost to pay for this. And so if the valuation of your property goes up and your tax rate stayed the same, the city would receive more money, which is as you're pointing out.
Which I will pay, yeah.
The city would without increasing the tax rate. And so you're not getting hit twice.
I know I'm not going to get twice.
Yeah, I think a better way to answer your question is two things. Number one, we're able to lock in the interest rate now, so we don't have to be in a precarious situation 3 years from now, because it is a valid point. We were able to confirm with our financial advisor. We sent a memo to the city council. We can lock at this interest rate, and so there's at least some stability where this could be the worst case scenario. Number two, to the tax rate. So the city council every year, typically in December, sets the tax rate. We look at the tax recap, the deficits, things like this. And oftentimes they increase it by a few pennies, and so you're kind of getting hit. It's going up because the rate's going up, but it's also going up because most of the increase is just because your value is going up. The city's getting more money, right? But the idea is that I say that a tax increase at all, or try to get this number down to as close to zero by the time we actually issue the debt, is all of these economic development projects in the pipeline add to what's called new growth every year. And the more new growth there is, obviously, it erases potential deficits, and then it decreases the amount to which the city needs to raise the following year. And so, best case scenario, and I'm not going to sit here and say this is exactly what's going to happen, but the city council certainly has the right, if this passes, to say, the taxpayers are taking a hit, and so when we do our traditional tax rate every year, not counting the debt exclusion, we're going to either keep the tax rate the same, or even if your value is going up, but the tax rate goes down, the amount is staying stable or decreasing, right? That's like best case scenario. And I'm not going to say that's absolutely going to happen 3 years from now, but if the economic development plan is pursued and implemented the way we envision it, it's certainly a possibility that the tax rate itself would stay the same or decrease. And the only reason your taxes would go up is because the value is increasing. And I just wanted to make the point about the interest rates.
Well, I was just showing the comparison.
Yeah.
We're not only going to get this assessment,
Yep.
And growth is good, but
Yep.
it could also be detrimental to
Yeah.
people on an income.
Yeah, no, and you make a valid point about other increases.
The more
If
that
I could-
your house is valued, the more taxes you pay, so.
Well, unless we get that rate down, which is,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And the more equity you have in the house, too.
Right, 'cause that's business more than anything.
A little bit on the Granby comparison, because our firm designed Granby as well. So the Granby had reno and ad. So the new square footage direct costs on Granby ad, the new portion, are the same as they are on this when you adjust for inflation, because I went back and checked on it. So very similar in that regard. Granby as a reno is a one-story, very simple reno. So in Holyoke, the direct cost and indirect cost in construction are actually really, really, really similar. All the costs that you take the project total and divide it by the number of square feet, you get the number you're talking about, like 600. But the construction cost per square foot is actually really similar. The difference has to do with the things that are on top of that. So the budget includes $2 million for swing space rental to allow the district to handle putting students somewhere else for a while. The project involves demo and abatement in much greater scale than Granby had none of that to worry about. You also have just a different type of project. This is a CM at risk versus a design bid build. So one important thing to mention there is that the cost we're putting out is the projected total project cost. The project hasn't been bid yet, and it includes the contingencies on the project. So that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to actually expend all of that.
Was the Granby project originally estimated at 24 million?
Was it, sorry, originally estimated at 24?
24 million.
I'm sorry, I can't remember.
It closed out at 37 million. That's what, I know the original was 24, the 30, but I'm not saying.
I don't think it went anywhere near 37 million, and it was actually the tightest project in the state. It was the most cost-effective project.
He kind of got me to the question I was going to ask. On your thing, you had 17% contingency.
Yes.
Now, I'd like to know, in all the projects in the state, in similar projects, how many projects have come in? Because you said if you had 100, it's a nice highlighted thing. If you're under, you don't spend it.
Right.
How many projects have been under the estimate, and how many have went over cost?
I don't think you stressed the.
I've heard y'all.
Stress the exposure.
I've been a project engineer for 35 years. And
I'm glad you asked. This is good because we wanted to get into this issue.
You didn't want to get into that.
No, we did. We did. Actually.
Because I would love to be under.
Yeah.
If you could tell me you're going to be 17% under.
No.
We can't be over.
We'll we'll break that down a little bit further.
My thing of it is, in my project engineering, I've done some 15, $20 million projects, nothing this size. But even in those projects, I never had anybody give me a 17% contingency fee. I've only had 10% or less contingency fees in most of my projects. And the projects, if I hit it, I got nice rewards for being underneath it. If I went over, I got hit. Are those kind of penalties within this?
Well, so let me just say, if we go under or if we go over, there's no charges to this group. Like, we're not going to make more money if the project is more expensive. But I want to break down the 17% because you're right, because you as a knowledgeable construction person understand this. So that 17% is actually a calculation that I did a couple of weeks ago that pulls together all the contingencies. So there are several. So the biggest number is actually escalation, because we have to sign an agreement now for a project that we're not actually going to start construction for a couple of years. So we don't know exactly what that escalation will be, but there are kind of rules of thumb for projecting it reasonably. And so that there's about 6% of the construction cost is an escalation contingency. Then there is a construction contingency, there is an owner's contingency, and there's a design contingency. So it's actually not, the 17% is in multiple buckets and gets utilized in different ways. But we thought it was useful for people to understand, because we've all heard, we've all seen the blank check, and we wanted to convey that there is a lot of very conservative thinking that has sort of been built into this. And it's also, to your question about, well, does it ever come in? I don't know the answer to that question about whether these projects typically come in under. I mean, we've certainly had our CM projects come in under, but I will say that all of one of the advantages of this process is that the way to think about the MSBA here is they're the bank, right? they care very much about whether this money is being spent well. So there's multiple levels of oversight. So you have me sort of at the lowest level as the sort of oversight of the project, the building committee, who I'm reporting to, and the MSBA. So there's all these different folks who are looking at this and saying, you know, and we have to justify both all the bid numbers and all of the expenditures that go into the project.
The thing of it is, though, it looks like, oh, we can hit this 17% funding if we didn't need it. I've never been in a project that didn't use some of my contingency.
No.
When you're working on a building like this, tearing it
Oh,
down,
yeah.
putting in new construction.
And you
I
should
think
have
that
it
is
for that
if you're
reason.
Underneath, that would mean that there would be less taxes on my
Right.
pocket, but
Right.
on the other direction, it's more. I was just wondering on what, if there was any numbers out there, why we even put a contingency out there, just because you're making it look like we could get 17% under.
Well, we have to put it there because if for some reason that, you know, I can't foresee right now because we've done a lot of due diligence, the cost of the instruction increased, there wouldn't be a way for the community to pay for it. So we have to have take a very conservative approach. But you're absolutely right. If there are savings on those contingencies, what they're doing is reducing the overall size of the project. I'm just telling you, my job is to protect the community from having the cost increase beyond the number that is on the table right here. So that's on me.
One thing that often does happen on the CM projects that I've seen in the western part of the state, she does more work out east, but out here, Greylock High School, they did a CM at risk project, and they did end up, they did their filed sub bids, and the numbers were lower than they expected. They had money that then they were able to say, okay, what do we, you know, money, it's not actually money, but expected project expenditures that they did not have. Therefore, they then decided, okay, do we want to, you know, reduce this overall? Or do we want to spend that on the playing field? So every community sort of approaches that moment and deals with it differently. But the point is that the project has to have anticipated the situation that you get to that point.
I agree with Dorrie. We've had projects where there were savings, and the community decided that they wanted to take that money, which was embedded in the borrowing already, and spend it on something else within the community.
I'd say that we're definitely looking at savings, and our job also, if this gets approved, our job does not stop at all. Our job is to find, you know, one of the examples of why, you know, this 80% number, right? So on site remediation, MSBA only gives us about 8% reimbursement. So it's up to us to work with the EPA or at the state level as well and the federal level to kind of get some grants to offset some of that remediation costs and the site prep costs. Then we don't have to ever bond for that. So absolutely, that's where our job continues. We got, well, I know they're all cozy up here. We have another one of these meetings next Tuesday, so feel free to come back or tell your friends and neighbors. We need more people to come in here. So next Tuesday is at Enlace.
Yep.
Is that true? Enlace on Main Street. So 2 more questions, maybe 3 more questions.
I have a comment.
We have all kinds of questions going on now. Yeah.
We have an issue with how this information gets out to the public. We don't have kids in the school system. We don't follow the Facebook or the .org or the TV, public TV show. We don't know that these meetings are even happening. We're not being told. They're not coming in the mail. They're not coming through text. They're not coming through anything.
It's on the city website, right? It's a city website.
But we have to we have to babysit the website to know what's going on. We should be notified. What if we didn't? What if we're not technology people?
I'm happy to chat with you after, because I'm interested in that. If there are ways that people in this community feel that they should be receiving
I didn't
more
know about the
information.
last one, and this one I only caught a glimpse of it on the news for like a split second.
What would be
It's
the
only
best?
reason
Yeah,
why we're here.
I'm just curious. Like, honestly, what would be the best way you think?
I think a mass text message to everyone, the phone calls, the robotic phone calls for people who have landlines, for the elderly, and for people who have cell phones. The best way is either a voicemail or a text message.
Half the people my age don't even text.
You don't. You're gonna.
Like I said, the voicemail, email, snail mail.
We really got, it's almost 8 o'clock.
I'll start texting you with Snowbam soon. So.
Question here.
I just wanted to follow up with Margaret. I just wanted to clarify. I'm pretty sure I just heard you say that we wouldn't start construction for several years. That's not correct, right?
We wouldn't start construction till the fall of 2021.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
all this is preliminary.
And that's because
Yeah,
they
it's
have
not
to draw it up, right? We have a design, which is at a schematic level. We have an agreement about how much it will cost that is quite detailed. But they have to draw the bid documents that will be the basis of the bidding. They have to create those.
And what is the expected opening date now that we've pushed this back,
So the,
process back?
so the schools would be open for the fall of 2023. 2023. There's about 2 years of construction. Actually, about, let's call it 20 months of construction.
I haven't heard anything about philanthropy or foundations or grants in a process like that. Is that just
That's
not allowed?
That's what I was just saying, we have to have a project first, so that's our job. If
Oh, I
this is
see.
approved,
Was your project?
Let's talk to some philanthropy that wants to do technology. What if we had grants come in and took care of all the computers for the school?
Because that was so important with the
But
library.
we can't do any of that until there's a project. I've already had a conversation with both Elizabeth Warren's office, with Congressman Neal's office. We're talking to other departments at the state level. They're all interested, but until we have a project, they can't approve a
So
grant.
that would be another
Absolutely.
way.
So I just want to add that Peck was awarded a grant for all of our children in grades 6 through 8 to go one-to-one with iPads. So they're going to have these really amazing devices, but there's lots of pockets in this building where they can't access the Wi-Fi. So the infrastructure of the building doesn't actually support that sort of technology.
But again, that was no cost to the school department.
None.
Right.
Zero, free.
So absolutely, and let's be honest, Holyoke has a really great story when it comes to writing grants. Back here.
You mentioned that you got a lock-in on the rate, on the bond rating. Can you make a documentation that is public to everybody to show that written agreement that the bond rate is set now? Because I think the last meeting that was a different answer, so unless I put it wrong. The other thing I'm gonna ask you to read to as a taxpayer, because I love the idea of the schools, but among the talk in the groceries everywhere, the number doesn't meet the taxpayers' needs. So I understand our long hope for all these kids, but where in our budget, where in money and revenue coming back to the city, can the city look for other avenues to add to the debt service instead of putting that number on the taxpayer? And I think if you can talk this better and put more solid numbers, you're going to get a better opportunity to have this done. But can you tell me about that bond rating? If that's locked in or not?
Did everybody hear that question? Yes, you got it?
Yeah, so we lock in the bond rating a month after the election, correct?
Yeah, so the eligible process is that we're able to lock in an interest rate approximately 1 month after the vote by the city council. That's how long it takes to go through the multiple different sets of lawyers.
And
so
then locked in through the entire, it's a lock.
it's a lock for the entire cost of the process, and we would be able to, council would be able to do that as soon as about a month after this. We do have a statement that the city received from our financial advisors laying that out, and that was shared with the city council.
Yeah, so, and there was rightfully so, a couple of city councilors asked, and we wanted to demonstrate throughout the last few months, and as I said, when we had some earlier meetings, we were saying that the worst case scenario average tax increase would be $240, $250, and we wanted to show that, hey, we've already made some financial improvements, we improved our bond rating, we've been able to work with the school department to get a contribution to bring that down to $129, and so we want to continue to show good faith efforts. And even when you think about the potential cannabis revenue, there's been some conversation with the city council about how do we identify how much we're projecting over the next several years to be able to potentially offset a percentage of that to go towards the debt service, towards the schools. And as we see more economic development growth, some of the projects I talked about earlier, again, city officials, myself and the council included, have the discretion, and I would ask the residents to continue holding me and the council accountable to this, to be able to offset, if we have certain new growth that comes into the city on an annual basis, it's not inevitable that your taxes have to go up every year, right? Like the rate doesn't have to go up, it could actually go down when we see new growth. And when you look at the pipeline of projects in the coming years, we anticipate that the tax rate should stabilize, if not decrease, knowing that this is a burden. It's not just a burden for the Holyoke Mall, right? This is a burden first and foremost for people on a fixed income here in the city of Holyoke that own homes and are investing here in the city, that have seen the CPA, that have seen increases in property values. We want people to continue to be able to afford here. We want low-income folks, if they buy houses, to be able to move up the economic ladder. So we want to continue making Holyoke an attractive place for people to live and to stay, that seniors can feel like they don't have to move out of the city after living here for decades. And so, I hear you, and I want to continue the conversation.
Writing and show that, you know, we can waive this, you know, like buying a car in a month. We can
Yeah.
show that this is the rate that we're gonna have. It takes away some years, people know that rate is locked in. It's
Yep.
the rate today.
Yeah, so we will have a document, a memo that is being sent to the city council that explains to them that the rate will lock in within 30 days of them taking the vote.
With your financer's signature.
Yes, we'll be able to, we have that. What we won't be able to say is like, because we won't have the rate, and they imagine it'll be the same now, between now and December, right? And we won't be able to have the signed agreement until after the election, we do the work, but. Yes.
Yep. And that'll be very clear. Yeah, we
Yeah.
will publish that wherever we
I
can.
have a non-financial question. Where are all these kids gonna be displaced?
Okay, one second, well, someone behind you first who has another question.
Yeah, Julia.
You mentioned the Holyoke Mall. I heard that the Holyoke Mall is, the owners of that are against this project. Is that true or not true?
They're against raised taxes.
They're against having their taxes raised.
Well,
They're not against.
I mean, frankly, I think it's pretty disingenuous of them because, yes, they are making themselves into more of an entertainment area for people to come. And you've got to have people that are going to come. And if we have better schools, we will have more homeowners here, we will have more buildings, they will have more people coming there. So I don't know if anybody's had that discussion with them, but
Yeah.
I see it as pretty disingenuous because aren't there large...
I've had the discussion with them, and they know, they recently got a tax abatement as well from the tax assessor's office, based on vacancy and whatnot, and as other malls are sort of shuttering, everything's consolidating into the Holyoke Mall. I mean, they've seen record profits. I mean, Macy's and other stores are now investing more money there. And Bill himself, the general manager, has said in writing that this won't cause the mall to close. And so what's been disingenuous the most is that opponents of this project have latched onto the Holyoke Mall as a reason that this shouldn't happen, as if the Holyoke Mall is more important than all of you in this room that have a hardship. So.
And I would say that the most visited space, the number one visited spot for casino goers is the Holyoke Mall. So we're trying to actually increase that traffic between people who come to Springfield to the casino to the Holyoke Mall. So it's actually doing well. Do we have a comment, or do we have anyone who has not asked a question yet? I think we can also sort of take this.
Can I make one statement on behalf, this is just on behalf of Catherine McCusker, who's working with Holyoke Media back there. She would like to document the feelings and opinions of people in the room about the project. So if any of you want to express your feelings about this to your community residents, please see Catherine after.
Either way.
This basement of the kids, while all this is going on, where are they gonna go? How is the busing gonna work?
Yeah, so it would be the students out of this building. In the project costs, there is funding set aside for potential swing space if we needed to find the space. We also will use whatever existing space that we have empty in our buildings now, which isn't a lot, but there is also money in this project for us to move students while this building is being constructed.
I just don't see any place in the city where they can go.
There are plenty. We're looking at all kinds of options right now. There are vacancies. For example, the Blessed Sacrament building is open right now. So we are actively looking at places for students to be displaced. The students in this building will need to be displaced.
Quick question, so the two new schools will be the only middle schools?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, so what wards will attend here, what wards will attend to the other?
Yeah, we haven't made the decision on the redistricting. We need to spend resources to do that, and we wanted to wait till we knew that the project was a go or not. If the project is a go, we're going to hire a consultant to help us do that work through the school district's funding. If it's not a go, we're going to make a move to middle schools, as was stated before. So but the project looks different depending on what the outcome is on November 5th.
Is it a set thing in stone about where the middle schools?
Yes. The plan is where they're going to be built?
Yeah.
Yes. That was the plan that was approved by the School Building Authority. So the two locations are set.
All right. Stop asking.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you very much. Please